Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first Marshall Hangout of this year. It's very exciting. We have a series coming up, so I hope that we will all come to those as well. Today, I have a lovely group of Marshall military women, which I'm very proud of. I'm proud to see a panel made up of Marshall military women who are going to do to talk about or answer questions about service, military civilian relationships, all kinds of things, no doubt. And I'm really pleased that they are here. So I'm going to mute myself and let them speak.
Fantastic. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Andrea Howard. I was a 15 military marshal. I'm really honored to be a part of this discussion with these two amazing women. So Katie has a reputation that precedes her. So she was the 2013 class secretary, and I followed in her footsteps at the Naval Academy of applying from that venue. And Katie was the authority to go to on all things related to martial applications, martial culture, upon arriving in the UK, best pubs to go to, which is, one of the most important facets of our experience there. And so she is a powerhouse in the surface community, and I'll have her explain her career in a little bit. And then Dahlia is one of my martial classmates. So I had the pleasure of having a little intrinsic Army-Navy rivalry within my own martial year group. And she has had a phenomenal career within the artillery side of the house, which is one of the fields that's only been open to women fairly recently. So we'll go ahead and give you guys a brief synopsis of our careers, and by order of rank and file. We'll let Katie go first.
Good morning, everybody. So Lieutenant Katelyn Davidson. I'm still very much a lieutenant. I am currently talking to you from Salem, Virginia, at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I am a surface warfare officer, so everything that you think the Navy, the basic form of the Navy. So I drive ships and everything that entails. So my first tour, I was on the USS Spruance out of San Diego, and I was a communications officer for 2 years. And then in 2017, I went to work on the collisions over in Yokosuka, Japan. And we were part of standing up a Naval Service Group Western Pacific, which has there's some politics involved with that, which we can get into. But the point of it was to inject some naval surface group into Japan, because it's a little bit of the Wild West out there in the best way. My second tour, I was on board USS Carl Vinson. I was an operations officer, so I did basically everything. So anybody that's familiar with a carrier, I was in strike operations. I was the OI Divo, GQOD. So I'm OD qualified on both a DDG and an aircraft carrier. And if want to talk about thrilling, catching F-35s is pretty cool. Now I'm headed to department head school. So I extended on board, so I've been at sea forever. And I'm going to be a operations officer out of a DDG in Rota, pending whatever funny business happens over the next year in the training pipeline. For my marshal tenure, I was at Cambridge for the first year, Gonville and Keys, so yay Keys for those of you who row. Then I was at Oxford for the second year, because I decided this whole ivory tower castle life was cool. And I rode in the boat race in Osiris, and then I rode in Henley, and I got a degree, and I went to class. I know Mary is looking. I learned a whole lot. I didn't just row. But yeah, and 2013 USNA grad, so English major, proof that you can do things with a BS in English. But looking forward to your questions, and I'll turn it over to Dahlia.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here and being part of this. It's really exciting to be included. Andrea reached out to Katie and I a couple weeks ago about this, and it was seemed like a really phenomenal opportunity to reconnect with the Marshall community, and also to talk about kind of this really small segment of the Marshall community, which is military. So I'm a 2015 Marshall Scholar. I graduated from the University of Kentucky, and then I ended up going to the University of Glasgow in Scotland for both of the years I was on my Marshall Scholarship. Originally, I had intended to go to King's in my second year, but I fell in love with all things Glasgow, with the Glaswegian people, and with that university. And I still consider it one of the best experiences of my life to have been lucky enough to go there. Once I returned from Scotland, I actually started my field artillery training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in 2017. I completed that and then was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas for about a year. During that year, I was a headquarters and headquarters battery executive officer. So I was in charge of helping my commander lead 250 some soldiers and basically manage all things resourcing, maintenance of equipment, anything to do with the nuts and bolts of running a 250 size person battery. We ended up going to a rotation at the National Training Center out at Fort Irwin, California, which is truly once in a lifetime kind of experience. I know a lot of military people, particularly Army people, go through that many times, but it's very eye-opening as to what your unit can do with its mission in a field environment that's not, the field environment at your local base. From there, I am actually branch detailed. So what that means is that my basic branch is military intelligence, but military intelligence doesn't need as many lieutenants. So essentially they lend those lieutenants to combat arms branches for their lieutenant time. So the first 4 years. So that's how I was field artillery originally. And now I've since shifted to military intelligence. So I currently am at Fort Huachuca. I am an advanced individual training company commander. So I have half of the intelligence analyst course for Army's military intelligence. And I look forward to going into our captain's career course here in the summer. Gotten to go all over the world with the Army and with the Marshall Scholarship. I've gotten to meet a lot of really amazing people throughout the military, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you for coming and joining us. I'll hand this off to Andrea.
Yeah, so before I start talking about myself, I do have to claim that one of my greatest victories on Marshall was volunteering Dahlia to be a part of her local church choir. So, you're welcome for that, Dahlia. I fell in love with the ladies of Glasgow as well, particularly over the age of about 60, and they really took to Dahlia too. And so that was, like I said, a good little cultural exchange that we had there. But I'm Andrea Howard. As I've already alluded to, I was Naval Academy class of 15, and then a part of the great, maybe the greatest of all time, I don't know, class of 2015 for the Marshals, and had a fantastic time in the UK. It goes without saying. So I did my first year at King's College London, and then my second year at Oxford, both of those times trying to focus as much as possible on weapons of mass destruction and proliferation. And then in August of 2017, returned to the United States to begin my nuclear power training, which, having gone from what we all know is a very experiential focused time in the UK back to 8 hours of trying to study every single day, plus additional homework time. And even for me, just relearning how to use a calculator was a big flex that I had to get hot on pretty quickly. So I did 6 months of classroom work in Charleston, South Carolina, followed by 6 months of hands-on training with a moored training ship nuclear reactor, which is just effectively a decommissioned submarine that still is a functional reactor with lots of safety mechanisms in place so that those of us who are learning how to do our jobs don't cause any sort of huge catastrophic issues. And then I reported out to the USS Ohio, which is the oldest operating submarine in the fleet, which is based in Bangor, Washington, just across the Puget Sound from Seattle. And since then, I've done a slew of jobs on board. The Navy is notorious for making us jack of all trades, master of none. That has certainly held true for my submarine tour. And we've done what I call a shipyard island hopping campaign. So I ended in availability at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard here in Seattle area, then spent 6 months in Hawaii at a different shipyard. Unexpectedly, we were the first submarine on the western side to contract COVID-19. So I can talk to you all about that if you'd like. And now I'm about to fly out to Guam actually this next week to start the process of doing what we call God's work somewhere further west. So it's been a great ride, and I love getting to be in this forum with these ladies. They have been mentors and peers for a number of years for me. So I'm going to just combine, we had two kind of topics that we broadly were going to speak about just briefly, because we want to focus mostly on questions and answers from those of you who are gracious enough to give you some of your time. And so I think each of us is just going to go through and discuss one of the biggest issues that we've faced during our time in the military, and then changes that we foresee in our respective communities with the new administration. So Katie, that's a pretty easy, question to answer. So we'll toss it over to you and see what you make of it.
All right, yeah, can you hear me? Okay, so to touch on the COVID stuff, so I was the COVID operations officer for our carrier as well, and if you want to ask any questions about that, I am more than happy to let everyone know how I feel about it. So I think my biggest contribution thus far has probably been the 2017 work on the collisions that I did. I was my like place over there was kind of like hot potatoed, so I happened to know a guy who happened to know an admiral who sent an email, and then 1 week later I was in Japan. And I was there for 4 months, and this was right after, maybe a couple of weeks after the McCain. So for those of you that remember, 2 destroyers ran into other ships. Both of them were cargo vessels. The Fitzgerald took it off the front end, and then I personally walked into the Fitzgerald, and you can see the damage. You can see all the ripped out the bunks, the captain's cabin. Like, you can see where the captain was hanging out of it. And I'll have to watch some like clearance stuff on this. But devastating, obviously. And then the McCain took it to the back end. So reading between the lines, probably a lot of closed casket bodies, crushed, etc. I don't want to, it's close to lunch, so I don't want to get too much into that. But ultimately, what we learned in Japan was that, one, there wasn't a ton of oversight, which is not uncommon for forward deployed naval bases. So they like it like this. There's also, the bad side to that when it's kind of left out of control. There was also a lot of stuff with regards to operational requirements, with regards to deployments, with regards to op tempo, and especially with regards to certifications that were not being held up to standard that it had been in CONUS, and even CONUS, there were some issues as well. But to Japan specifically, all of that stuff compounded upon with the maintenance stuff. So if anybody's ever been to Yokosuka, their maintenance facility is small, right? So that the Japanese, people are exceptionally detail oriented and they're great at what they do. And the shipyard is probably one of the best that we have contracted, but it's so small. And combined with the amount of collisions that were happening, because before that, maybe I think like 6 months to a year, the Antietam had a grounding out there. So most of our collisions numerically have happened in that region of the world. That's due to a lot of things. One being it's where we deploy, frankly. South China Sea, it's where we pull into port. It's a DDG base outside of Yokosuka. It's also the busiest sea traffic in the world, or one of, excuse me. So you basically get there and you see the massive problem that has sort of been laid upon your lap, and picking out just exactly how to fix it. So a lot of it was how do we contract that maintenance out elsewhere? So a lot of the reason why the Fitzgerald ended up leaving Japan was because it had to go out. There was just not enough maintenance facility. So looking at the way we had detailed ships abroad, what tended to happen is you just kind of forgot about them in Japan, and because the maintenance wasn't as good as it was, they would just sort of fall apart. So then you have the decrepit ship combined with a crew that has to keep it floating, which is no small task, combined with your general certification, combined with your actual war fighting, combined with all of the stuff that they want you to do out of Congress, right? And then the freedom of navigation operations, and then these things called carrot exercises with bilateral, multilateral country exercises, where we're supposed to gain a lot from that. And then you have, tier 1 through whatever countries that you're supposed to pull into port to. So ultimately, the Navy had, and I'm sure Andrea can speak to this too, there's a lot of wishes and not a lot of people who would say no. Because the minute you say no, then you basically take a hit on your fit rep. So, and then you don't make it out of command, then you don't make it out of command, you never make admiral, and et cetera, et cetera. there's a lot of work cut out for you. So I ended up writing the missions, functions, and tasks, and getting some of the PR, meeting with all the maintenance facilities, and getting the ball rolling on what is still an entity in Yokosuka that really just serves as the executive agent for our like home base stuff back in San Diego to make sure that things are running as intended. That being said, COVID has exacerbated everything. And if we want to talk about like deployment schedules and all that kind of stuff right now, and the TR is our next door neighbor for a while. I think we're coming into, and if we want to talk about Captain Crozier too, we are coming into a time where it's going to be very interesting to see just what happens to retention, suicide rates, dark stuff. So if we want to touch on that, that'd be great. I think I've probably spoken enough for a little while, so I'll turn it over.
Yeah, thanks for that, Katie. Let's have Dahlia kind of outline her big hot takes.
Okay, so I think that I've been a battery executive officer, and that was very challenging. I had especially when we went to Korea, we had a couple $1 billion property book of U.S. government property that is owned by the American people that we had to take care of. We had, a couple hundred people, American citizens who raised their hands to serve, to take care of. And we were able to do that successfully, and I was really proud of that. But honestly, one of the biggest challenges I've ever faced in my life has been being an advanced individual training commander during COVID. So a little bit of background, I took command in June 2020. So right as we're hitting a spike here in Arizona. And, we kept going through different types of lockdowns and, limitations on everything. And one of those limitations has been the restriction of our soldiers to post. So what that means is that they can't leave the installation. They can't go into the local town. They can't go up to Tucson. Unless it's an emergency for a family, they can't leave and go see their families. Similarly, their families can't come see them. Now, I absolutely agree with the reasons behind this. So we have soldiers that are going to be going to, many different locations across the world, including deployed areas, including restricted areas. And so we have to ensure that those soldiers, that we're not sending them with COVID and then further infecting, the bases and the people who live on those bases with COVID. We're not just continuing the spread. But the result of that, a second and third order effect of that has been a really big hit to the behavioral health, the mental health and well-being of my soldiers. We do as much as we can and with the resources we have. We utilize our behavioral health providers, our chaplain, who's amazing. We utilize the counselors that are available on post, and then ourselves as cadre. My team, my drill sergeants, they do an amazing job, like helping soldiers through really rough times. In the summer, it was like every single day a soldier would come to us and say, someone has died. Someone in my family has died. And you're just taking that on every single day. And my team has done it with a level of professionalism and compassion that is just, I'm so proud of them for that. But you watch this for a year and it wears you down. And similarly, my team, because our soldiers have to be restricted, we also have to be restricted. So a lot of my team, myself included, we didn't see our families or get to go home to our families for a year, maybe longer, depending on if, what the circumstance was before we were in lockdown. Family lives have been very disrupted throughout all of this, and that's had impacts on our soldiers. Now we're starting to get the vaccine, which is awesome. I actually got my second shot today, which I'm really happy about and, excited about. No ill effects so far, so I'm doing good. But watching my soldiers and seeing their faces when they're dealing with just horrific tragedy at home and they can't do anything about it because they're here and we have to keep them here. That's been one of the biggest challenges that I've faced. And I couldn't have done it without my team, and I'm so grateful to them, particularly my first sergeant. She's amazing. She's my right-hand person, the senior NCO in my company, and she keeps the ship afloat. So not to, take from my Navy friends, but yeah, so that's one thing I will say. But I think I've spoken enough. I'll hand it off to Andrea.
Yeah, for the record, nautical puns are always accepted and encouraged, so we'll take it. It's nice to see that, right, we have a panel of exclusively women on this call here, and not to be the one who stereotypically talks about gender kind of related issues, but really my time in the service can't be dissociated from that. So if you asked most submariners what the biggest change was between 2010 and 2011 in the force, given three options: one, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell; two, the announcement of the allowance of women on board submarines; and three, the banning of smoking on board submarines, nearly all of them will tell you that smoking on submarines was the biggest change to happen to the force in terms of just the impact on kind of the day-to-day for the majority of the sailors. However, for like somebody like me, who is an LGBTQ identifying woman, that created the opportunity, only a decade ago, for me to just be in this career field. And since then, the biggest culture kind of facing issue we've had is just how do you make a confined space with men and women work so that it's still a professional environment on the officer side of the house. So all three of the ladies on this panel, we are all officers. So, have a college degree, we commissioned, we do more of a managerial and, fighting the ship role, they call it. So taking your vessel or taking your unit and thinking externally about how that plugs into the larger picture. So for us, at least in the submarine community, the women on the officer side are pretty locked in. There are still newer Virginia class fast attack boats that need to be integrated, as well as older, smaller fast attack boats that should be integrated actually kind of starting in this next year and in the follow-on year. So that is to be determined. But what's really still at the cutting edge is the junior enlisted integration. So women who are on the non-officer side, who typically will come kind of straight from high school. We are only the third submarine in the fleet to have junior enlisted women. And so, it's different when you have kind of your officer rank to give you a little bit of a shield from what may be some of the more nefarious, aspects of dealing with the crew and people who don't necessarily want you. But these women don't have that same fortune. They are peers and oftentimes ranked below authority wise as the people that they're dealing with. And so there was some generational churn out, to just be quite frank, of people that needed to leave in order to give these women a safe space. You can only fight them so much. So very happy to talk about that. We also on our boat are dealing currently with the balance of needs of the ship vice the desire of personnel to transition under like transgender identifications that they have. So happy to speak to that a little bit as well, having been a part of the process for that for one of my sailors. And then more broadly speaking, another just topic we can talk about for food for thought for the group are specific to the subsurface domain and submarines, the rise of autonomous technologies and UUVs. I can speak to that to a certain extent. I'll have to watch myself, but I'm happy to talk about kind of the future of warfare in the undersea domain. We're in a really dynamic time right now, especially in the theater of South China Sea. And lastly, the biggest takeaway I had external to COVID-19 in 2020 as a member of the armed forces was just how do you keep people accountable? So, towards the beginning of last year, there was a trial of Eddie Gallagher, and we're still dealing with the aftermath of the collision. And then COVID just really exacerbated this notion of, if a commander says that they need help, how are they supposed to do that? What does right look like in terms of the feedback that they get in the support? So the Navy is still very much so dealing with its own existential crisis of what the role of people are in speaking up and being those truth talkers. So yeah, any of those three things are fair game, and we'll kick it off to Q&A, which Mary, I'm assuming you will be our den mother and leader of the pack per usual. So we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, let me put my glasses on. Okay, yeah, Ben, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, it's great to hear from you all. I was a 2002 Marshall Scholar and a Naval Academy graduate and a surface warfare officer. So
Yeah, go goats, no big deal.
But I have been a civilian for the last, several years. And so I've kind of lost touch a bit. One thing that I when I reflect on my military martial experience that I feel like is pretty unique is that on the martial side, I was able to interact with kind of the elite of society. And on the Navy side with my sailors and I know with your soldiers, Dahlia, like you get to interact with people who maybe come from a less advantaged background. And I was just wondering, since 2002, there was some polarization back then, but I think since then, our country's polarization and maybe suspicion of elites has grown, and I wonder if it's, I don't know if you don't really have a frame of comparison, but has it been hard to relate to your sailors? You come from Oxford, or Cambridge or King's College or Glasgow, has it been hard for them to relate to you and for you to relate to them, especially in this kind of poisonous political environment?
I can take that, or whoever wants. So, yes and no. So I completely agree with you on the experience. And coming back, the reprogramming, I think in the Navy was kind of a painful time, as I imagine it probably is for a lot of military marshals. I had a Desron come on board, and right when Trump got elected, this was back in 2016, and I asked the exact question, effectively, which was like, how are we supposed to tell our sailors that this man cares about LGBT rights, women, race, etc. And he thought, we've had presidents before, and this will be fine. And I think that has proven to be completely wrong. I hate, with regards to actually talking to the sailors, I kind of hate the fact that I'm going to say this, but I do have a habit of, putting your martial stuff on a shelf, so to speak. I think that by virtue of being chosen as marshals, right, we exhibit the leadership, we exhibit, we talk, we articulate this, that, and the other. We kind of see through the, forgive my French, Mary, but we see through the bullshit, right? So I think that is, it's endemic to our personhood, but the way you relate to the people, you relate to them on a human level, and I mean, sense of humor, right? And I'm like a white woman, right? So even I can only make it so far in some ways. So I think without becoming too friendly, it's like a weird line you walk. But I mean, I think in all leadership opportunities, it's the more real of a person that you provide to the table, and the more you stick to your guns and the consistency, and frankly, at the very basic level, just showing that you care about them. And I hate that you have to actually say that, but I think a lot of us get tired, right? And I don't want to necessarily poke at any of my peers on the boats, right? But on the ships, you just got to care. And the minute you care, right, that'll open up, you'll learn everything, right? So I've got, and a lot of these kids are 18 years old, and it's probably going to be the reason a lot of us stay in is just because, these are impressionable young kids, and they come from a very different generation, and they come from a place where they are taught from a very young age the way the world is supposed to be. And that's not everybody. So you got those kids, and then you have the kids from really, really underprivileged backgrounds who are still, we still have the kids who are prison or Navy, right? So, which is unfortunate that still exists, but it absolutely still exists. I had a guy who threatened to shoot me because I didn't approve his leave. And then another guy, which is real, and then was put on restricted in lieu of arrest. And then another guy who had kicked out of the Navy for drugs, and then ended up breaking into the shipyard, demanding to speak to the captain and the whole chain of command, to overturn his other than honorable discharge. So you get a big mix. So I think as long as you show that you care, and that you're consistent in your ideals, and you think you really got to get comfortable with the fact that you're not necessarily like everybody else around you, and you hold tight to these folks, then things will hopefully get a little bit better, and you can be carve out that localized sense of goodness around you. And hope that answers the question.
If I can jump on here too, I'll answer at least my perspective on the Army side. I found I had to, what Kate said, I had to put my martial life a bit on the shelf. and that was just so that way I could focus on the new challenges that I was facing as, a young lieutenant coming back from, being overseas and really, having to relearn math again, because I'm not a math whiz, and I went to field artillery school. And that was a huge, gut punch, because I've always been good at school. And that was I was not great at the math that was required. I mean, I passed and I'm safe to do all the things I need to do. But it was that was the humbling experience for me. And I think that helped me, because then I went to my first unit and I had kind of that to share with my soldiers. We, beyond the human level, saying hey, where are you from? Maybe why'd you join? What's your family like? Talk to me about your spouse, about your kids, about your mom, your dad, that kind of human level, bonding. We could bond over the fact that okay, we're not all great at everything that we do, but we're constantly working to get better. And then just touching on the generational piece. So I, as an AIT commander, most of the people I teach, which currently we've got, a couple hundred people just in my company, they're 18, 19, 20 years old. Most of them are under the age of 24. They're the new generation. I know some of the things in the Army that have been coming down is they're the next greatest generation. And honestly, I believe that. I've bought into it, because while this generation has its struggles, particularly with mental health, and can sometimes struggle with, learning what authority means, learning what discipline means, they also have this level of automatic desire to help and better their community, their internal community in the company and within the Army, that I didn't necessarily see within my own generation. I saw a lot of very career motivated, very motivated to get the job, get the pay, go forward with the next thing, get the next training badge. That kind of people surrounded me as I was coming up as a cadet. But the people I'm training now, they're more hey, there's something wrong with this program that is, you're teaching us. How can we fix it? Or here's my idea how to fix it. And I love that about them. It's very motivating to see that in a generation that's just, 10 years younger. So it's, I don't feel myself as culturally elite to them, because I can connect with them in a lot of ways that are like what Katie was saying, that human level. And then just shared experience, getting out there. We wake up every day, go to PT at 5 a.m. I was at PT at 5 a.m. this morning, out there with my soldiers, and, they get to see, the cadre experience the long days and the long hours and the cold and the hot and all the things with them. And I think that helps break that sense of cultural eliteness that they might feel.
Yeah, the only other thing that I'll add without beating a dead horse too much is that what's really unique for the military marshals that I think a lot of people don't really understand is normal person, right? They finish their marshal time. Most likely they're going to find a job that is somewhat relevant to what they just studied during their time on the marshal, right? They'll be able to utilize the field and the studies that they did, at least to the methodologies or something of that sort, and apply it to a different career field or continue on in academia. For us, it's really challenging because your job as a junior officer is to be a tactician. So the marshal time, you're over in the UK, you get this great opportunity as a 20-something-year-old to think about the military strategy, what is the future of the force, and all these fantastic thought projects. And you go to Chatham House, and you go to the Royal United, the RUSI, Royal United Service Institute, and you get to interface with these high-ranking people, both on the civil and the military side. And then you completely 180 and you go back to just being a junior officer. And in my case, to just having to learn nuclear power and submarine tactics. And that doesn't feel, jointed to that experience that I had in the UK. So then on the side, it's living different lives of, doing things like Truman National Security Project, or I'm a podcast host, and I just finished recording one previous to this with some wonderful folks in Brussels, which is why I've got the full get up. But, it's really difficult to have that bifurcation of martial experience and your actual job as a junior officer. And that's one of the things that I think people find most challenging. And I'm sure that Ben, you did as well. So thanks for that question. And
I have something, one last thing, and I'm so sorry. I think what we really need to do as a community is that we really need to make a legitimate, stronger military martial community in general, because there are just not enough of us, that stand. I don't think there are any senior officers, and Mary just let us know that there's never been an admiral. I'm not necessarily, and Andrea is going to be our admiral. But I think that kind of stuff is imperative, right? The other scholarships that should not be named absolutely have that, right? And we're promised, certainly at the academies, this like alleged network that's going to take care of us. And I don't know about you, Andrea, but especially, and maybe for some of you in the group, that sort of seems to dissipate the minute that you go off on your isolated tours, and it becomes very isolating out in the middle of Japan, San Diego. Where am I going? Like Shirota, right? All these kinds of places where you're so used to talking to policy, you're so used to talking about all this kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden you're 24, 20, almost, oh my God, I'm almost 30, 30-year-old lieutenant who doesn't really matter anymore because you're a lieutenant, right? It's like, that's another really big thing. Like, just to be real, like, you got to really watch your mouth around. There's a lot of ego in our line of work, especially as a woman, and especially as a woman who doesn't really have a problem telling someone they're an idiot. And maybe you folks can speak to that too. But I really do think that in order for like there to be more successful and like have more Ann McLean's, like, or at least in the service community, I can't necessarily speak to the others, is that one, you got to find your quote C daddy, which is an awkward term, but it's like, our Yoda. But like outside of that, like for the amount of smart people that we have, it is surprising to me that we don't have, a little bit stronger knit community, for lack of a better word, or like, better ways. Because me talking to some 06 captain who's like, you're so smart, like, do all these, it's not for where I think a lot of the folks in this group should go, and especially the younger folks. Like, we need to start carving out stuff. Like, there used to be the Petraeus, like, line of pyramid, but Petraeus kind of, yeah, everybody knows how that went, right? So it's something to that effect. And I'd really like to motion for that if you want to have like action items after this, but that's all. Thank you.
So I would just say that the good news is that just looking at the faces and names that are on the screen here, we have a wide range of military scholars from dating right back to 2002, 2003 here. So maybe this is an action that we can take from this meeting, is around trying to create more of a community that is one for the military scholars. Christopher, talking about other militaries, you have a question.
Hi, everyone. I'm a 2007 Marshall Scholar. I did most of my time in Cambridge. And for full disclosure, I'm an Air Force Academy graduate and still active duty Air Force. My question is for Andrea first. From your perspective as a young military officer, does the military have a responsibility to shape policy? And has any part of your time in the UK influenced your answer? You started to touch on it a little bit towards the end of your last response.
Yes, the military has a responsibility to shape policy. And, one of the themes and reasons why I'm still very idealistic about the military is because it is a social driver for change. And the military needs to do right by the people that are serving within it, and therefore give them an opportunity to be those representations of success stories on a larger national level. So particularly like the transgender ban that came about under the Trump administration, and then now is being reversed under the Biden administration, witnessing the toll that had on the sailors was absolutely heartbreaking. To see people whose service status was put in flux because of the exact timing by which they submitted packages to get medical waivers and then undergo this transition and continue serving. And so what is redemptive, though, is that the military now, at least for these next 4 years and hopefully beyond that, will be able to be a driver for proper care for transgender military members, and to showcase the ability of them to keep serving on some of these unrestricted line platforms. So where people are fully medically qualified to do certain jobs in the Navy. And, Dahlia can probably up that as well. In regards to the larger like cultural issue of accountability, like I said, the Navy, for whatever reason, given a number of these case studies, the Eddie Gallagher, the collisions, COVID-19 and Captain Crozier, the Navy was put to the forefront of the accountability existential crisis, and the fact that, again, there was a huge breakdown in communication between civilian leadership and military leadership about what right looked like for the rectification of what could be perceived as wrongdoings, and in some kind of objective cases were wrongdoings. So as for the path forward for that, it goes into the larger theme of civil military relations, which is that I think it highlighted that the military can't really just be left to run itself, and that there needs to be a larger element of trust as well between the civilian leadership and the military leadership. I don't know what the path forward is for that accountability, but it was really disheartening as a 03 lieutenant to be witnessing civilian overstepping into designation of a SEAL and really what his punishment should be, or on the back end, again, military commander not getting the support he needed for COVID-19, but then there's a whole backstory of security, security implications as well. So I'm being really terrible and not giving you a clear answer, but I think the answer is yes. And where the groundwork starts is kind of by these forums that we're having, but hopefully at a more senior level of having more people outside of the military understand the issues within, such that we have a means of accountability externally. And then from the internal side, that we are able to be open, honest, truthful about what problems that we're facing, and then reaching outwards for public-private partnerships of getting assistance on how we tackle issues better. And COVID-19 was the perfect example of not really leaning on our healthcare experts in terms of what should have been done just as an initial action for many of our vessels. So any of the other gals want to hop on that?
So I would say that, touching on some of the things you talked about, Andrea, the military service members, we raise our right hand, and this, Chris, Christopher, you swear an oath, and you take that oath seriously. And I don't know, in depth about the Navy, but I'm sure that they have, an ethical system and a moral system that is required to be followed by all of their sailors. I know the Air Force does, and I know here in the Army, and particularly in training and doctrine command, we heavily enforce that. We create an environment where we can train these young soldiers who are making that transition from citizen to soldier, to serving the American people, that they leave out of here understanding the heightened expectations of them. You come out of high school, and you're like me, I'm just like, I'm Dahlia, that's who I was. But as Captain Darge, I have a very different and more intense responsibility in the way that I act and the way I present myself. And same with all of my soldiers, from highest ranks in the U.S. military, U.S. Army, all the way down to the PV1s, that the people who don't wear rank yet because they haven't gotten to that level. And I think that can help drive policy too, because when big changes happen in the military that are driven by the cultural changes in our nation, such as lifting the transgender ban, getting rid of don't ask, don't tell. Even just recently with the Army, the changes to our uniform regulations that were made in light of, hey, we not only need to recruit and retain a new generation, but the old standards are blatantly not healthy for some of our female service members, in particular for women of color, just blatantly not healthy for them long term. Those are things that I think, as they change within the military and people go through that military experience, whether it's 3 years, 4 years, 20 years, 30 years, they then leave the military with those ideas in mind. And we're seeing more and more veterans, stand up and want to serve in the U.S. Congress, serve in local and state political functions. And you're starting to see those same ideas of like equality and fairness and protection of others, and earning what you get in the military through merit, not through who you know. You're starting to see those ideas come through in policy changes, which We'll see how they go, but I think that that's, it's slow change. It's not really as blatantly obvious as some like that are coming from political to military. But I think that that is an accountability piece, and it has to do with how we train our service members and how we develop the culture within the military.
Yeah, and like some of the more tactical oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to let other people have some time for questions too. But I'm glad that that you've hosted this, and I'm sure as young officers you're recognizing this tension between a hierarchy where there's some legitimate, command over you and things that you have to do, but you have a unique martial experience and good opinions, good scholar background. So please don't hesitate to be kind of an effect for change, whether it's at the small tactical level in your units now as junior officers or at strategic levels as you advance. It's important to have this dialogue with your superiors and with your civilian counterparts to make good changes. So I don't want to take too much of your time.
Nicholas Shafer, you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Joe, thank you for the recommendation to reach out to Dale Skoric, but I guess I was more curious about your perspectives. Oftentimes military policy is so much siloed, as someone that works on policy with Yemen and Libya at USAID, we have very little direct contact outside of state. And so I'm just curious about your relationship or how you think about policy shops and policy conversations and what role the civilian and military capacity interaction has in that conversation. And apologies for the jackhammer, it was interrupting my thoughts while I was speaking.
So I think it depends on what level you're talking about. So for our level, tactically, I have absolutely zero interaction with that. At the, the Pentagon strategic levels, like you have to fight a very real cultural wall where we care about one thing and one thing alone. I should be more specific. There is a contingent of U.S. military folks at the senior level who have made it to the senior level because they care about the primary aspect of being in the military, which is putting warheads on foreheads. And to get around that, because I agree with everybody that it is absolutely changing, but I think that is still very much so a huge barrier to progress anywhere. Like our institutional inertia is still really slow, really, really slow, right? So I think it's getting better. And I think the more savvy, I think the fact that there's just better technological, contacts, this, that, and the other going on just in this generation that we can have better kinds of communications like this. But ultimately that is, even as an operations officer, I'm not going to think about that probably until post command almost. And maybe an 04 short tour. And I think that's really disappointing. I think it's a really important aspect of why we need to get more folks of us up in the senior levels, but it's like we care, but ultimately at the end of the day, we care more about, I wish aid was and humanitarian assistance was something that we spent a little bit more time thinking about, but humanitarian aid, those kinds of operations, at least for our corner of the Navy, and it depends on who you talk to, it's just, we don't view it as the primary mission, and it has fallen from being a whole tenet to it being, a part of a different, tenet. And I think especially as the budget cuts come, sequestration was a big part of this, all the ships that ran into each other, right? All the acquisitions going on, we don't take that aspect of policy. It's just not at the forefront. And Andrea, you look like you have something to add.
No, I was going to say is that, part of the issue is also driven, it's not even necessarily external organizations reaching out to DoD. It's the theme that I talked about earlier of us being, pushed to be jack of all trades, master of none. So that's a talent acquisition problem within the Navy as well, that doesn't allow people to become subject matter experts and then to reach out externally as well and provide that backup with, the internal DoD culture knowledge. So, there's countless stories of even just students from the naval academies, picking their first ships, and somebody is fluent in Chinese and they don't send them to 7th Fleet, which is based out of Japan, right? They send them to Mayport, Florida instead. Or, you do these shore duties where great, you become an expert on, financial acquisition within the military, but then you don't ever actually utilize a follow-on tour in acquisitions. And so, what Katie is talking about too is also just an internal struggle that the military is facing in regards to actually allowing people to somewhat focus so that they can become, over the years, contextualize in whatever issue it is that needs support, or you actually have an expert on Yemen, on Libya, on whatever nation that could really be utilizing that cooperation between DoD and another entity. So that's something that just is a larger issue as well that we don't have a right answer for yet and there's initiatives to get to that point, but kind of the old boys who made it up through the system as it exists aren't too keen to change the system that created them into admirals and generals.
Yeah, our detailing system is broken, right? Everything about the way we are detailed into our jobs, it is based on needs of the Navy. It is based on, this mystical thing that happens at a place called Millington, which I'm fairly certain is a haunted house on a hill where there's lots and lots of lightning. It's a very sad place, but ultimately, like I might go into a shore gig where I have national security studies, but ultimately the only thing that gets me anywhere to be able to have those kinds of conversations and work on anything that I'm actually, and I'm sorry for talking too fast, and anything that I'm actually a pseudo expert in is through personal relationships. And that's like pretty messed up considering that the Navy is supposed to be, the last remaining meritocracy on earth, right? Or the military in general, right? Everything's about personal relationships, but like, it shouldn't be like this, right? I should not have to fight people to be like, look at my sweet degrees. I have a thing to say about this. I should be able to work on this project. Yet you've got people that get kicked down to like Kings Bay, Georgia to do training pipelines, even though they've got, super degrees in like nuclear engineering, and to quote a couple. And this is a real problem that we have. And I wish, and you got to fix that before I think we can fix this, before we can get to the really high end stuff.
So we've got, I think, another question, and before I ask her to ask the question, just to give some context, because I know many of you on this call don't know about our new initiative in Marshall, where we have partnered with the Cabinet Office Fast Stream, and each of our new scholars gets partnered with a young fast streamer in government, and they're invited to these events. And Charlotte, you're going to ask a question.
Yeah. So I'm part of the Fast Stream program, as Mary was saying. So I work in the Home Office from a strategy point of view, but I'm also operational with the Metropolitan Police. So I was just wondering how your experiences in the UK contributed to where you are now, anything you learned from a strategy or operational point of view, and how we as partners can help them, really.
So, I think that one of the biggest things I learned myself by being in the UK was how to be adaptable. Here I am, I show up in a foreign country, and because of the way Scottish universities do it, I showed up a week early, much to, I think, Mary's chagrin, because she had to come pick up just me at the airport. And then I got to Glasgow and I had to figure everything out myself. And that has served me well, because since that point, I've been flexible enough, and I feel like adaptable enough that you throw me into a task, like Andrew was saying, jack of all trades. We do the same thing in the Army. We can adapt quickly. Also I'm not as maybe hesitant as some of my peers to reach out to other entities, even just on our own installation or other entities within our community. I have a very limited scope, I will say, because I am, training commander. So my whole focus is on my trainees. But I've been able to reach out to the USO to get support for certain things, to our VFW for support for our trainees, like things like that. They're just helpful, and just I didn't have the hesitation to do that I've seen in a lot of my peers who maybe have gone straight from like either the academy or ROTC or officer candidate school directly into their jobs, and just didn't have that world experience, particularly not something like what I got to go through. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, being particularly in the nuclear field too, it underscored the importance of the cooperation that we have between the UK and the United States in that domain. And it was really special when I went back to the United States to begin my nuclear training. I got to do the whole process with an exchange officer from the Royal Navy who I was kind of intending to like serve on a Virginia class submarine here and then utilize familiarity with that plant in order to utilize familiar with that plant in order to go back and head up kind of new developments of boats within the UK fleet. And so particularly from the nuclear side, it was always really special in the UK where, you know, even though I was unqualified, hadn't actually gone through my nuclear training, I was able to go to different defense conferences and really get elevated in regards to the status of people and coming to seek me out and, you know, let me ask my questions, get feedback on and advice on my military career. And so, you know, the nuclear community, and I've been saying this since 2014 when I interviewed for Marshall, the nuclear community is kind of the epitome of special relationship, and getting to engage with that on a strategic level prior to starting my career, I think really paid dividends and helping shape my perspective as my little cogwheel within the large organization. And then just to kind of give me motivation for wanting to stay in this career path a little bit longer to continue to grow that relationship.
Katie, you not got anything to say?
I think I've talked enough, Mary.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Just checking. Okay, I think that's all of the questions. And it's just to say thank you so much to the three of you for doing this. What I learned is that I need to help facilitate some kind of community of military scholars. You're all here, so no excuses, and we'll work out what's the best platform to do it on. But I think that would be a really great idea. And, you know, past and present, serving, not serving, I think all of that is a valuable experience and helps, you know, to navigate. And actually, academy and not academy. I know it's great to have ROTC. We didn't have ROTC for a very long time, so it's really great to have that. So thank you, everybody. I think that was really fascinating and interesting. I learned a lot. Hopefully you all learned something, and we will take this further and look at how we can better facilitate these kind of relationships, certainly with the military and also with our fast streamers now. I think that's another aspect that we can look at to see whether there's some ways that we can do that as well. So thank you very much. Next week's Hangout is in physics, galactic archaeology. I'm very excited about this. I know nothing about it, but by the end of it, I'm hoping that I will know something about it, and then I'll be able to advise the future scholars about it. That's how I learn. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. And I look forward to seeing most of you next week. Thanks a lot.